So we all know that Zoro is cool and all, but did you know that originally he was going to be even cooler? That's right, Eiichiro Oda wanted to give Zoro a sweet pair of schmick black sunglasses. And I will remind you that when One Piece first began in the late 90s, there was nothing that could make you cooler than black sunglasses. That and a leather jacket. Hello and welcome to the Grand Line Review, your source for everything One Piece. My name is Liam, but I was originally supposed to be called Michael. However, my cousin was born about 6 months before me, and they stole the name Michael, so now I guess I'm Liam. And today we are here in order to discuss what could have been in the world of One Piece, because what happens in Oda's head and what eventually ends up in front of our eyes are two very, very different things. And to demonstrate that, we are going to immediately jump into a quick round of good gracious, who is that character who I am seeing on my screen right now? A very simple minigame, the rules of which are as follows. Here we have an original concept sketch for a well-known One Piece character, and it is going to be your job to guess who that character is supposed to be from the following of options. Now, should you guess incorrectly, then your punishment will be to subscribe to the Grand Line Review, also resulting in consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed. And if you are correct, then your real-life character design will gloriously graduate into its final form. So who is this mystery man? Is it Bartholomew Kuma, Gecko Moria, or Blackbeard? It's hard to believe, I know, but this is indeed one of those characters. So make your choice now and we shall reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1, and bam! It was Gecko Moria. So look, he's definitely come a long way and through a couple of questionable directions. But if you guessed either Kuma or Blackbeard, then you know the thing to do, and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the Grand Fleet. Welcome. But to linger on this for a second, yes, this was the OG Gecko Moria. In this incarnation, he was actually intended to be a priest with a split personality. So I imagine that one side of him would have been all good and humble and stuff, whatever priests do, and the other side would have been a more villainous, piratey prick sort of guy. Very interestingly, the key visual elements of this design would be carried over to Bartholomew Kuma because he does wear similar style clothing, and of course he wields a Bible at all times. Just in case of some sort of heretical emergency, I suppose. But we did not go straight from this to the Gecko Moria we know today. In fact, evidence would suggest that Oda had a bit of a rough time designing Moria, and his next incarnation would be this bizarre masked figure. Now clad in a cloak and a headdress, this one is effectively a complete mystery. We have no idea what his personality was meant to be like here, but it is a pretty terrifying image. Although my guess is that the mask would have been just for show, and underneath it would have been this goofy Oda designed face, as is standard in One Piece. His next evolution is much closer to the Moria we know, with his ball sack shaped body, but even then there's a lot of elements here that did not carry over. I quite like it though. If nothing else, he looks very piratey. And this whole endeavor is a great insight into Oda's design process. He tends to start quite normal, then pushes the bounds of creativity until we end up with something, for better or worse, truly unique. And in the spirit of Thriller Bark, we can also see this with Nightmare Luffy's original design. Both of these sketches present very schmick Luffy and not a lot of changes to his physicality overall. I personally think he looks really cool in that top hat, and you can also see the panda eyes that got used in the final design, as well as Gear 4th actually, which is a weird effect, but I think I've got it figured out. Basically, Luffy, for purely aesthetic reasons, he covers the depressions of his eyes in armament haki. Once again, for no other reason than to look cool. But I honestly think that stuff like this is what separates Oda from other manga authors. He comes up with an idea that yes, it's cool and aesthetically pleasing, but then he says to himself, you know what? What if instead he just looks like a stacked zombie with stick legs and inexplicably small biceps? Seriously, look at the forearms, then look at the shoulders, then look at the biceps. Something has gone very, very wrong during this particular workout. But I love that for the most part, he's not afraid to make his characters look weird. Now with that said, Oda isn't always on the mark when it comes to decision making, and a very famed example of this would be Mr. Shanks. Because originally, in the very first chapter of the series, Shanks was not going to lose his arm. And in this case, Oda's editor intervened and quite blatantly said that the story wasn't interesting enough. It needed something to provide a bit more drama, a sense of stakes and consequences. And so Oda then came up with the idea for Shanks to lose his arm to the Lord of the Coast. So if anybody is ever curious about what an editor actually does in manga, well, their job, if they are a good good editor is to amp up your series. A trained media eye can immediately detect when things are not working and also when they are. And in this case, Oda's editor was dead on the money because I cannot imagine this chapter without Shanks losing his arm. It's probably one of, if not the most memorable moments or images in One Piece, and the fact that Shanks sacrificed an arm gives his character a level of depth and admiration that we still feel, 24 years later, so it was a very good move to say the least. For another example of editor intervention, and we know very little about the context of this, but according to an interview in 2007, Oda was originally planning to introduce fishmen as early as chapter 3 of the series. As a bit of a recap, this is the chapter that introduces Zoro for the first time at Shellstown, and looking back on it, I have a bit of a hard time trying to figure out where this fishmen or fishmen plural was meant to appear. It's a marine island, so maybe we're going to see an enlisted fishman, maybe one of Helmeppo's guards or something. But once again, this was a good editorial move, because a great editor knows not only when something needs to be added, but when we need to show restraint, which is good because showing these more supernatural figures so early on may have detracted from the focus of this arc, which is the human drama of Zoro, Rika, and Dickbag. Now on to something that has always intrigued me, being Golden Lion Shiki. And that's because he is one of the only known characters in One Piece who is simultaneously canon and not canon at the same time. It's like a Schrodinger's Shiki or something. And that's because he is mentioned and does even appear in the manga, but his film Strong World is not canon. So it's a bit of a weird situation, and that's because Oda originally intended Golden Lion Shiki to be a bit of a big deal. Before the concept of Strong World had ever begun to gestate, Shiki was planned to have been an antagonist to the Straw Hats. In fact, his first planned name drop was going to be after any slobby during the conversation between Whitebeard and Shanks. But Oda decided to remove Shiki's name because he thought it might be too much information for the readers to take in. Because remember, this was around the cluster of chapters where Dragon was revealed to be Luffy's father, Garp was revealed to be his grandfather, and we were all shook by the introduction of the 4 emperors. So adding Shiki in on top of that does seem like a placement that may not have done the character justice. And of course, ultimately, Oda decided to use his story for a movie instead of a fully fledged arc, which I am thankful for. As for Shiki's design, he's probably best known for having a ship's helm embedded into his old man head, but this was actually taken from another character. And may I now present to you the original design for one Bartholomew Kuma. And to be perfectly honest, I think it looks like a bit of a hot mess. There's just way too much happening here. You got your cyborg features, the helm, the suit, the hair, the everything. There's too much everything. Although I suppose the overall effect is like Kuma was originally going to be a less advanced cyborg because he looks much more cobbled together as opposed to the sleek perfection delivered in the Vegapunk version. But it's pretty cool because you can see how elements travel from character to character. Gekko Moria's original features went to Kuma, Kuma's original feature went to Shiki, and Shiki went to a non-canon film. It's a very organic process, Oda just Frankensteining bits and pieces together until he lands on some sort of solid design choice. Or at least what he considers to be a solid choice, because look, I'm still not sold on Gekko Moria, and I don't think I ever will be. Flashing back a bit, I often say that One Piece is a lot less planned than many people realize. So many story cementing decisions are made by Oda at quite literally the last minute, and here is another example of that thing that I just said. So here we have Vivi, our beloved, or mostly beloved, honorary Straw Hat member. She is still insanely popular to this very day. In fact, she ranked 21st globally in the World Top 100 character poll. But a little known fact about Vivi's entire existence is that she is just a happy accident. When Oda first introduced Vivi on Reverse Mountain, or I should actually say Miss Wednesday, because at the time Oda had no plans to make her a princess. Miss Wednesday was designed to be a throwaway Baroque Works villain who would be quickly forgotten and maybe make an appearance on a cover story X amount of years down the line. But in the back of his mind at this point, Oda was also building up to the Alabasta arc, and partway through Whiskey Peak, he realized that, I need a princess. And so he ended up choosing Miss Wednesday for this role because, and I quote, she already looked like a princess. So Miss Wednesday ended up getting the job for the same reason that most people do in real life, because she was in the right place at the right time. I need someone. Wait a minute, you're someone. You're hired. And it's crazy to think that if Oda waited even a couple of weeks to plan all the way to Alabasta, then we would have ended up with a completely different princess character. Vivi and Miss Wednesday would have been two entirely different people. Although, as it is, they still sort of are. During Whiskey Peak, you will notice a sharp change in personality with Vivi. All of a sudden, she went from a goofy, seductive, almost gimmick-like character to a rather empathetic and morally upstanding person with a deep, dark backstory to be told. And canonically, the explanation is, she was just acting. Such acting skills, Vivi. But we we know the truth. And we also know a rather shocking truth about another Straw Hat. This time we are talking about the Going Merry and the rather tragic idea that the Straw Hats were never meant to part with it. When this mini mighty lamb first debuted on page, it was meant to be the vessel of choice for the entire series. Luffy was going to become the Pirate King on the back of this here ship. But you also need to remember that Oda only originally intended One Piece to last for about 5 or so years. And so as the world expanded, it started to get a bit too big for this little lamb. So Oda came to a painful realization that the enemy ships were starting to get a bit out of hand. Their scale and their power was not something that the Going Merry could ever compare to. So he began structuring an entire saga which would ultimately culminate with the Straw Hats saying goodbye to their beloved vessel. The idea was that after chapter 303, which is the first chapter after Skypiea, that within 1 year we were going to say farewell to the Going Merry and turn to a new ship. Now with that said, this ended up being more like 3 years because the Water 7 saga blew up in terms of complexity, but we did unfortunately eventually get there. And it is quite sad to think that in another more condensed universe we would have ended the series with Merry. At the same time though, moments like Merry's goodbye are why many of us end up becoming so emotionally invested in One Piece. Oda is very, almost annoyingly good at tragedy, and I personally never thought that I would shed tears over a big floating hunk of wood, but well, here we are. And I can't imagine that this was an easy decision to make either. Oda is every bit as attached to his characters as we are, probably even more. Though as much as I can, have, and will complain about how he uses death in certain cases, it did definitely take some guts to put Merry's story to page, and that is worthy of many, many praise units. On a more lighthearted note, here is the original Chopper. And just look at this stripy mofo. What is even happening here? I love the idea that Chopper was originally going to be this easily irritable chain-smoking reindeer. In fact, you can almost see a bit of Sanji in this design, although I think that is just the combination of smoking and comical anger. He just looks so old and bitter, which is why I suppose he was eventually changed into a more positive incarnation, a more perhaps merchandisable incarnation. That and the idea that the Straw Hats definitely needed a bit of variance. If you look at an original sketch of the crew, firstly, there's chain-smoking Chopper right there. And secondly, they're all kind of the same size, roughly the same height, and more or less the same average human weight and width. And compared to what we have today, it's honestly just not exciting. Except for this guy right on the end here, because fun fact, whoever this was originally had Nico Robin's spot on the crew. He's like a mini botanist whose plant characteristics were given to Usopp, and then Robin just slid on into the crew via DMs. She is the only one who was not clearly planned to be a Straw Hat right from the get-go of the series. I mean, even Jinbei had a spot since day one. Look at the Jinbei thing. So thinking about it this way in terms of Straw Hats, Robin is probably the biggest surprise to both Oda and the readers. And if you'd like to see more abandoned concepts like Gunslinger Sanji, then do check out this video which gives you the thing that I said. Good fun to be had, so I look forward to seeing you there.